Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I've always been the kind of man who notices things. It wasn't something I learned, or a skill I deliberately honed. It was just the way I was wired. I was one of those husbands who noticed when my wife changed the scent of her shampoo, from the lilac and vanilla I loved to something sharper, less familiar. I noticed the subtle shift in the shade of her lipstick, from a soft rose to a bolder crimson she hadn't worn since our first few dates. I noticed the weather patterns of her moods, the high-pressure system of a good day, full of light and easy laughter, the low-pressure front that would move in silently, bringing a chill to the air between us long before any storm of words broke. For years, this attentiveness was the engine of our relationship. It was my way of saying, I see you, I care, because I truly did. I saw the poetry in the mundane, the beauty in our shared routines, the universe contained within our unhurried conversations over coffee in the morning. Genevieve, she seemed happy at first, truly, incandescently happy. I remember the way she would smile with her eyes when I came home, a genuine crinkling at the corners that reached deep inside me. She would make silly jokes during dinner, even on the hardest days, and she remained a constant, present sun for our two boys, Rowan and Finn. But over time, that light began to dim. It wasn't a sudden blackout. It was a slow, creeping fade. The way she looked at me changed first. The affection, once a flowing river, became scarce, as if it had been rationed. A gesture performed out of habit, just enough to avoid the discomfort of its absence. The morning kisses, once a lingering promise for the day, became a rushed peck on the cheek as she was already turning away. Goodbyes at the door, which always included a hug that felt like a recharging of the soul, became hollow words called from another room. The look that once said so much, now simply avoided mine. The first time I felt that cold, churning knot of doubt in my stomach was on a Tuesday night. It was ordinary in every way. The sky was a hazy purple. The streetlights were just beginning to hum to life. I came home from work, briefcase in one hand, a small bouquet of her favorite freesias in the other. I found her on the couch, her face illuminated by the pale blue glow of her phone. "Hey, Jen," I said, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. Silence. Her thumb moved methodically across the screen. I stepped into the living room. The scent of takeout hung in the air. "Genevieve?" I said again, a little louder this time. She jumped, startled. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second before her thumb quickly, almost violently, locked the screen. She tossed the phone onto the cushion beside her as if it were hot. A smile bloomed on her face, but it was a forced, unnatural thing. It didn't reach her eyes. "Declan, hi. I didn't hear you come in. How was your day?" she asked. But the question was a hollow echo. It was a polite phrase, a script, devoid of the genuine curiosity that once filled her voice. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing me. That night, as I stood at the sink washing the dishes, the warm water running over my hands, I found myself lost in memories. I remembered how things used to be. The spontaneity, the shared glances across a crowded room, the way we'd stay up late talking, our legs tangled together, mapping out the future. All of it had vanished. And the most unsettling part was that Genevieve didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she didn't care. It was as if she had grown so accustomed to this void between us that she had accepted it as normal. An absence disguised as routine. But I noticed. I always noticed everything. And for the first time in our marriage, I wished I didn't. The days that followed were filled with a silent, heavy discomfort. The air in our home grew thick with unspoken words, with questions I was too afraid to ask. Genevieve started going out more often. At first, the excuses were plausible. They were woven so skillfully into the fabric of our lives that to question them felt like an act of paranoia. "I have a late dinner with the marketing team tonight. Honorable, we're pushing to meet a deadline. There's an emergency client meeting across town. I'll probably be home after the boys are in bed. It's Sarah's birthday. A few of us from the office are taking her out for drinks. Don't wait up." Always with the right tone of conviction. Always with a plausible reason that left no room for argument. I would just nod, smile, and say, "Okay, be safe." But something inside me, a primal instinct, refused to accept this new rhythm as part of our life. This was something else. An alien frequency disrupting the song we had composed together. I started to see the details again. Not the loving details I used to cherish, but sinister ones. The way she dressed for these outings. It seemed excessive for a simple corporate dinner. A silk blouse I hadn't seen in years, one she always said was for special occasions. The extra time she spent on her makeup, meticulously applying a shade of eyeshadow that made her eyes look darker, more mysterious. And there was a new perfume. Her signature scent was a light, floral fragrance I bought her every year for our anniversary. This new one was different, heavier, a musky, exotic scent that clung to her clothes when she came home late, smelling of the night and of places I couldn't picture. I tried to push the suspicions aside. I argued with myself in the quiet of my car during my commute. You're being paranoid, Declan. She's just stressed from work. Adult life is complicated. You're insecure. You need to trust her. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, not in a grand revelation, but in a quiet accumulation of details. The way she'd rushed the boys through their bedtime story on those nights, a quick kiss on the forehead, a mumbled, "I love you," before she was out the door, leaving me to field their questions. "Where's mommy going again?" Rowan would ask, his small face etched with confusion. "She has a very important meeting, buddy," I'd say, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. The doubt began to eat away at me, a slow-acting acid dissolving the foundations of my world. And so, I started to observe more closely. Not as a husband, but as a detective in my own life. The breaking point, the moment that turned suspicion into a sickening certainty, came not from anything I saw, but from a text message. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard, pushing Finn on the swing set, the chains groaning rhythmically. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an old friend from college, Mark. We were just catching up, trading stories about work and family. He sent a picture of his daughter at her soccer game. I sent one back of Rowan and Finn building a pillow fort. Then, his message came through. A casual, throwaway comment that shattered my world into a million pieces. "Hey, funny thing, saw your wife yesterday. She was at that fancy Italian place downtown, Venti. I think it was her boss with her, the one she always complains about. Hope she was giving him an earful, haha." I froze. My blood ran cold. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. Finn's voice, calling, "Higher, Daddy, higher," sounded distant, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. Genevieve had told me she was having an external meeting that would run late. An important client, she'd said, but she had been at dinner, at a romantic, candlelit restaurant, with the man who, until a few weeks ago, she claimed to despise. That was it. That was the missing piece. I pretended to laugh it off in my reply to Mark. Haha, yeah, probably grilling him about project budgets. But as soon as I put the phone away, I stared at the green expanse of my lawn, at my children playing, and the ground crumbled beneath me. I already suspected. I already felt it in my bones. But now, the puzzle had fallen into place, and the picture it formed was bitter, ugly, and undeniable. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, the familiar landscape of shadows and moonlight now seeming alien and hostile. Genevieve slept beside me, her breathing slow and even. She was a stranger, an imposter in the sacred space we had built together. A firestorm of emotion raged inside me. There was the searing heat of anger, a white-hot fury that made me want to shake her awake, to scream the questions that were burning a hole in my soul. There was the crushing weight of betrayal, a physical pain in my chest that made it hard to breathe. And beneath it all, a deep, cavernous grief for the woman I thought I knew, for the life I thought we had. I could see it all playing out in my mind. The shouting match. The tearful, hollow denials followed by the devastating confession. The chaos. And then, an image surfaced, clear and pure, extinguishing the flames. It was the image of Rowan and Finn, sleeping peacefully in their beds down the hall. Rowan, with his serious little face, clutching the stuffed bear he'd had since he was a baby. Finn, sprawled out sideways, his hair a messy halo on the pillow. They didn't deserve the chaos. They didn't deserve to be dragged into the wreckage of our failure. Their innocence was the only thing left that felt pure, and I would be damned if I let my anger shatter it. In that moment, a decision was made. A switch flipped inside me. The husband, the wounded, emotional man, died that night. The father took over, and the father was cold. He was practical. He was focused. I chose silence. But not the silence of resignation. It was the strategic silence of someone who loves his children so much that he needs to think, to plan, to protect what truly matters. I knew I was about to enter a war. But unlike what many would do, I chose to begin this war with planning, not with shouting. It was the beginning of the end, but I didn't yet know how much it would hurt. All I knew was that from that point on, I couldn't deceive myself anymore. Genevieve was no longer the same, and neither was I. The next morning, I woke up a different man. I put on a mask of normalcy, a carefully constructed facade of the loving husband. I made coffee. I helped get the boys ready for school. I kissed Genevieve goodbye as she left for work, the touch of her lips on my cheek feeling like a brand. Then, my real work began. I became an architect of silence, meticulously building a case in the shadows of our life. I started simply by observing. I paid attention to her schedule, cross-referencing her excuses with the reality of her comings and goings. I noted dates, times, and durations. Later, I moved on to her digital life. It felt like a violation, a trespass into a private space, but the sanctity of our marriage had already been burned to the ground. This was merely sifting through the ashes. Her phone was locked down, impenetrable. But her laptop, which she rarely used for personal matters, was an open book. I waited until she was in the shower one evening, my heart pounding in my chest, and I started searching. It didn't take long. Betrayals, I learned, often avoid the obvious channels. It wasn't in her primary email. It was in an old account, one she'd set up years ago and seemingly forgotten. But she hadn't forgotten. She had repurposed it. There they were, emails between her and her boss. The messages were a knife, twisting in my gut with every line I read. They weren't just logistical, arranging their clandestine meetings. They were intimate. They had nicknames for each other. They shared inside jokes. The worst part were the confessions about me. She painted me as a good man, a reliable father, but boring, predictable. She wrote about our marriage as if it were a comfortable cage she needed to escape from. She was hiding the weight of her life with me from him, just as she was hiding him from me. Reading those words tore me apart. Each one was a fresh wound, but at the same time, it hardened my resolve. It turned my grief into steel. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, long-term deception. It was too late to save the marriage. What remained now was protecting the boys. And I would build a fortress around them that nothing, not her lies, not her betrayal, could ever penetrate. A week later, I found myself sitting in the sterile, quiet office of a man named Mr. Davies. He was a family law attorney, recommended by an old colleague with the quiet assurance that he could handle delicate situations with discretion and strategy. I sat across from his large mahogany desk, my hands resting on my knees. I projected an aura of calm, of neutral observation, but inside, a volcano was simmering on the verge of eruption. I explained the entire situation. The suspicion. The evidence I had gathered. Genevieve's increasingly strange behavior, and above all, my profound fear that during an acrimonious divorce, she might try to manipulate custody of the boys or distort the narrative to gain an advantage. My only goal, I said, my voice steady and firm, is to protect Rowan and Finn. They come first, always. Mr. Davies listened without interruption, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He didn't offer condolences or emotional platitudes. He dealt in facts and legal frameworks. He explained the limits. He told me I couldn't simply transfer our assets into the children's names. Legally, that could be interpreted as fraud, an attempt to hide marital property. However, he said, leaning forward, there are smarter, safer ways to ensure the children's future stability. He laid out two options. The first was a trust fund for the boys, which was perfectly legal as long as both parties agreed. The second, and more intriguing option, was a post-nuptial agreement, a document, drafted now, that would define the division of assets and custody arrangements in the event of a future separation. The key, Mr. Davies stressed, is that it requires both signatures. She would need to agree without any apparent pressure. An idea began to form in my mind, a risky, audacious plan. I couldn't act impulsively. I had to change tactics. So, I went home and began the most difficult performance of my life. I became the perfect husband. The husband she complained about in her emails, only amplified. I became even more present, more attentive, more affectionate. I pretended to believe every excuse she gave. When she said she had a late meeting, I'd say, "That's tough. Let me save you some dinner." I showed renewed interest in her work, asking about the very projects I knew she was using as a cover. I complimented her new haircut. I prepared her favorite dinners on the weekends. Slowly, carefully, I began to create an atmosphere of trust, a false sense of stability. I was rebuilding the foundations of our marriage with hollow bricks, creating a structure that looked solid from the outside but was designed to collapse on my terms. About 3 weeks into this charade, I found my moment. We were sitting on the couch after the boys were in bed. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. I turned to her, my expression carefully modulated to convey sincere concern. "Jen," I began, "I was thinking today about the boys, about their security. If, God forbid, something were to ever happen to one of us." I brought up a couple we knew who had gone through a turbulent, messy divorce, leaving their kids caught in a painful tug of war. I saw a flicker of agreement in her eyes. "That was just terrible," she said quietly. "It was," I agreed, "and it got me thinking. Maybe it's time we put something in writing, for the sake of the children, to make sure they are always protected, no matter what." I chose my words with surgical precision. "This isn't about us separating," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "This is about protection. For Rowan and Finn." Genevieve, lulled by this manufactured peace, by the image of the devoted husband I was playing, found the idea reasonable, sensible, even. With Mr. Davies' help, I drafted the agreement. The language was neutral, focused entirely on the well-being of the children. It included the creation of a significant trust fund in Rowan and Finn's names, with clauses preventing either parent from withdrawing funds without mutual consent and requiring justification for the children's direct benefit. And buried within the legal jargon was the most important clause. In the event of a divorce, custody would be shared, but the children's primary residence would be with me. It was framed as providing them with stability by keeping them in the family home, without hindering their relationship with her. To convince her, I used her own maternal instincts as my argument. I said that if anything happened, the kids should have everything guaranteed: their home, their education, their future. She hesitated, of course. She read it over several times, but the neutral language, the careful way I had handled the conversation, and the sheer audacity of me suggesting it while acting like the perfect husband, it worked. She saw it not as a precursor to divorce, but as responsible family planning. We signed it on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, at a small notary office downtown. There were no arguments, no major questions. I feigned calmness, my hand steady as I signed my name. But inside, I felt a seismic shift. I had just won the most important battle of the war. Genevieve's signature, in her elegant, flowing script, sealed a layer of protection over our children. She would never know that the document, which seemed like a testament to our enduring partnership, was actually the key piece in the demolition I was about to orchestrate. The truth would come out soon. And when it did, there would be no room for games or blackmail. Everything would be tied up, documented, and legally validated. The only thing left was the direct confrontation. And for the first time, I felt ready. The right moment arrived on a Friday. I had arranged for my mother to take the boys for the evening, a date night for Genevieve and me. She thought it was another part of my renewed effort, a gesture of romance. She had no idea it was a stage, carefully set for the final act. I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, filled with the soft, late afternoon light. I went straight to my office upstairs, to the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet where I had been keeping everything. Calmly, methodically, I took out the documents I had gathered over the past few weeks. They were all there, printed copies of the emails between Genevieve and her boss, restaurant reservations made on dates when she claimed to be at long meetings, bank statements showing small, odd cash withdrawals in places far from her work, and on top, slightly folded, were the divorce papers. But these weren't ordinary papers. They had been strategically tied to the postnuptial agreement Genevieve had signed just weeks earlier, the one that, disguised as concern for our children, now safeguarded their accounts, their home, and their future with me. Mr. Davies had reviewed everything, line by line. Nothing here was impulsive. Every clause had a purpose. I carried the stack of papers downstairs and laid them out on the dining room table, a neat, damning collection of my wife's secret life. Then, I waited. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the familiar sound of the engine cutting out, the click of her car door. A few moments later, her keys dropped into the ceramic bowl by the door, the sound echoing in the silent house. She walked into the kitchen, letting out a tired sigh. "Declan, you're home early." Then, she saw me, standing by the dining room table, Her eyes immediately darted to the papers spread across the wood. Her smile faltered. I didn't move. I just looked at her, my face a mask of calm. "We need to talk," I said, my voice even, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. She walked slowly toward the table, her gaze fixed on the papers. She picked up a sheet or printout of one of her emails and started to read. Her hands began to tremble. The paper fluttered from her grasp and landed back on the table. What is this?" she whispered, her voice thin. "What do you think you know?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't shout. I simply stated the facts. "I know about the dinners at Venti. I know about the hotel reservation in the city 2 weeks ago, on the night you were supposedly at a team-building retreat. I know about your boss, Genevieve. I know everything." I listed the dates, the times, the places, the names. I spoke of the reservations for 2 at restaurants far from the city center. I said it made no sense to keep pretending. I told her she still had a choice. She could leave with what little dignity remained, respecting the memories we once shared. Or she could turn this into a fight she was guaranteed to lose. Genevieve stumbled back, as if struck. She sank onto the couch, covered her face with her hands, and began to cry. Deep, ragged sobs of someone who has finally been caught. She murmured that she never meant to hurt me, that it all started without her realizing it, that by the time she tried to stop, she was already too involved. Excuses. They were just words, meaningless noise against the roar of my pain. I kept my gaze steady. There was no room for excuses anymore. I only wanted to hear one thing. The question I had been holding inside me like a lead weight, preventing me from breathing properly for weeks. With a firm voice, I asked, "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated. She closed her eyes for a few seconds as if gathering the courage to speak the truth, perhaps for the first time in a very long time. Then she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "For years." My heart tightened. The room felt like it was tilting. "How many years?" I pressed, my voice dangerously low. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the floor and whispered the number. 4. 4 years. The number echoed in the silent room. 4 years. That meant she had already been involved with another man when Rowan still wore diapers. When Finn was just taking his first steps, my throat went dry. The betrayal, in that moment, surpassed the simple pain of infidelity. It was a theft. She had stolen our history, those years, those memories I cherished, the family Christmases, the boys' birthdays, our anniversary celebrations. All of it was tainted. A lie. I had been living in a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. I took a deep, shuddering breath and held myself together. I needed to stay strong. For the boys. And then came the final question. The one I had always avoided voicing, even in the deepest, darkest corners of my own mind. The ultimate fear. I looked directly into her tear-streaked eyes. "Are they my children, Genevieve?" She froze. Her whole body went rigid. She tried to answer quickly, to form the words, but her mouth took a moment to obey. "Yes," she choked out. "Yes, Declan, of course they are. I swear, you are their father. There was never any doubt about that." But by that point, trust was a currency we no longer shared. Her words were bankrupt. I knew that if I accepted this based solely on her word, I would carry the poison of that doubt for the rest of my life. Every time I looked at my sons, a part of me would wonder. I stood up from the table. "I'm getting a DNA test," I said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. The final, terrible, necessary step. The days that followed were a gray, featureless blur. Genevieve panicked when I mentioned the DNA test. She called it humiliating, insulting. She tried to argue, to appeal to the memory of the man I used to be. But that man was gone. I was immovable, a rock carved by years of her deceit. The next morning, I called her to talk. In a calm, detached voice, I told her I needed her to leave the house for a while. The fight finally drained out of her, replaced by a desperate pleading. She cried, she begged me to reconsider, said she had nowhere to go, that she couldn't bear being away from the kids. I took a deep breath, holding her gaze without flinching. "This is inevitable, Genevieve. We will resolve custody amicably, as the agreement states. But for the next few days, you need to pack your things." I told her I would explain to the boys that their mother had to travel for work, a final lie to shield them from a truth they were too young to understand. She didn't insist further. She knew that whatever had existed between us was not just broken, but had been shattered into dust. On the same day, I took Rowan and Finn to a private clinic. I told them we were going for a simple health checkup, something routine. On the drive there, I kept the radio on, singing along to their favorite songs, my voice a strained imitation of cheerfulness. Inside, I was a whirlwind of fear and anxiety. "Will it hurt, Daddy?" Rowan asked, his small hand clutching mine. "Not at all, buddy," I replied, my voice miraculously steady. "It'll be quick. They just need a little sample of your saliva." Finn thought spitting into the little container was hilarious. The entire process was light, easy, and over in minutes. They suspected nothing. I maintained a calm tone the entire time, hiding the seismic turmoil I was experiencing. For them, it was just another different morning with their dad. For me, it was the moment that would define the rest of my life. The envelope arrived 4 days later. I had spent the morning staring out the window, my eyes not focusing on anything. When the delivery person rang the doorbell, my heart hammered against my ribs in a way it hadn't in a long time. I took the envelope, my hands slick with sweat. I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sealed paper as if my entire identity was contained within it. It took me a long time to open it. I breathed deeply, but my chest felt heavy, constricted. My past, my present, my future, it all hinged on the single sheet of paper inside. Finally, with a trembling hand, I tore the side and pulled it out. My eyes scanned the page, skipping over the technical jargon, searching for the conclusion, and then I saw it. Result: compatible. Conclusion: Declan is the biological father. Owen and Calvin, Rowan and Finn, they were, without a shadow of a doubt, my biological children. My legs went weak. I let my body fall to the side onto the mattress, and I cried. I cried silently, my shoulders shaking, burying my face in the comforter. It wasn't a cry of despair, it wasn't even a cry of sadness. It was the cry of someone who had been holding the entire world on his shoulders, alone, and could finally let it go. They were my children. They always had been, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever change that. The thread that bound me to them was real. It was unbreakable. And in that moment, it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Genevieve didn't return home after that conversation. 3 days passed in silence until she called, her voice small and broken, asking to see the boys. I agreed, on the condition that it be for short periods, once a day, without complications or drama. She came in the late afternoons, a ghost in the house that was once hers. She would spend an hour with Rowan and Finn, her smile strained, her hugs lingering a little too long. Then she would leave, and I would be left to restore the fragile peace of our new reality. I kept the boys' routine stable, a comforting rhythm in a world that had been thrown off its axis. I never spoke ill of their mother in front of them. I just kept repeating the story that she was dealing with some important work matters. The divorce itself was an anticlimax, a sterile, procedural affair. We met in Mr. Davies' office. We both signed the pre-prepared documents. There was no shouting, no final, dramatic confrontation. Everything was clear, laid out in the Trojan horse agreement she had so willingly signed. The house stayed with me. Primary residency of the children stayed with me. The trust account, created exclusively for the boys' future, remained intact, a fortress she could not touch. The meticulously crafted agreement ensured that my children's assets would be protected, regardless of any future attempts she or anyone else might make, with everything resolved legally. With my sons safe, and my future with them secured, there was only one loose end left to tie. I took the last package of evidence I had gathered over the weeks. The screenshots of conversations, the reservation records, the emails exchanged between Genevieve and her boss. I put it all in a plain manila envelope. Anonymously, I sent a copy to the president of the company where they both worked, and another copy to the boss's wife. I didn't do it out of pure revenge. It felt more like balancing the scales. It was an act of finality, a way of ensuring that the world they had built on lies would be exposed to the harsh light of truth. The impact was immediate and devastating. Genevieve's boss, a man with years of career prestige, was fired for gross misconduct and an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee. Genevieve, who until then had managed to maintain a discreet professional demeanor, was also dismissed days later. The boss's wife, upon discovering the full, sordid story, filed for divorce. A few days after losing her job, Genevieve, who had maintained a calm and resigned attitude about our separation, called me. She was distraught. She yelled, she cried, she accused me of ruining her life, of destroying her career. She said I had no right. I listened silently for a few seconds, letting her rage wash over me. Then, I responded, my voice firm and cold as ice. I didn't do anything, Genevieve. You two did this. I just stopped protecting what no longer deserved to be protected. She hung up without another word. Months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that even after all the destruction, she didn't end up with him. The man for whom she had risked her marriage, her family, and her dignity, he moved on, alone, and she was left exactly where she had placed herself, with the weight of the choices she had made. As for me, I moved forward. I moved forward with my boys by my side, their laughter the new soundtrack of our home. I moved forward with a clear conscience, knowing I had weathered the storm not with blind rage, but with purpose and a father's unwavering love. Some mornings, I wake up early, before the sun, and I go into their rooms. I watch Rowan and Finn sleep, their chests rising and falling in the soft light of their nightlights, and I feel a sense of peace that I thought I had lost forever. The life I had with Genevieve burned to the ground, but from those ashes, something new and stronger has begun to grow. A life built not on the illusion of a perfect marriage, but on the unbreakable truth of a father's love for his son. A new dawn was breaking, and we were ready for it.